she wed a paralyzed CEO for $1 billion gift and healed him. A remarkable love story. Welcome back to Love Scene Diaries, where we bring you the most captivating tales of love, heartbreak, and redemption. Today's story is one of ambition, sacrifice, and an unexpected romance that will leave you breathless. So, grab a cozy spot and let's dive into this unforgettable journey of love and healing. The grand ballroom of the Harlow Biotech Charity Gala shimmered with opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over the sea of designer gowns and tailored suits, while the soft hum of a live orchestra filled the air. It was a night of wealth and power, where the elite mingled and deals were made with a single handshake. But for Veronica Pierce, this wasn't just another glamorous event. It was her one shot at saving her dream. Veronica stepped into the room, her emerald green dress hugging her figure with understated elegance. Her dark hair was swept into a sleek bun, and her sharp hazel eyes scanned the crowd with purpose. She wasn't here to sip champagne or exchange pleasantries. She was here to secure $1 billion investment for her groundbreaking medical research, a project that could revolutionize regenerative medicine and change countless lives. But as she moved through the crowd, her confidence wavered. The room was filled with titans of industry, their conversations laced with power and privilege. Veronica felt like an outsider, a small-town girl who had clawed her way into this world of wealth and influence. Still, she straightened her shoulders and reminded herself why she was here. This wasn't about her. It was about the lives she could save if she succeeded. At the center of the room, seated in a custom-designed wheelchair, was Grant Harlow, the enigmatic CEO of Harlow Biotech. He was a man of contradictions. His sharp, chiseled features and piercing blue eyes exuded authority, but his wheelchair was a stark reminder of his vulnerability. Grant was a legend in the biotech world, a self-made billionaire who had built his empire on innovation and grit. Yet he was also a recluse, rarely seen in public and even more rarely engaged in personal relationships. As Veronica approached him, she felt the weight of his gaze. His eyes were cold and calculating, as if he could see straight through her. For a moment she hesitated. What if he dismissed her outright? What if he saw her as just another ambitious researcher looking for a handout? "Miss Pierce," Grant said, his voice low and commanding. "I've been expecting you." Veronica's heart skipped a beat. He knew who she was? She quickly composed herself and extended her hand. "Mr. Harlow, thank you for inviting me. I'm honored to be here." Grant didn't take her hand. Instead, he gestured to the empty chair beside him. "Sit." The directness of his tone caught her off guard, but she obeyed, lowering herself into the chair. Up close, Grant was even more intimidating. His presence was magnetic, his sharp features softened only slightly by the faint lines of weariness around his eyes. "I've read your proposal," he said, cutting straight to the point. "Your research is impressive, ambitious even, but ambition alone doesn't guarantee success." Veronica swallowed hard. "I understand that, Mr. Harlow, but with the right funding, I believe we can achieve breakthroughs that will change the future of medicine." Grant leaned back in his chair, studying her. "And what makes you think I'd be willing to invest $1 billion in your dream?" Veronica hesitated. She had prepared for this question, but under his intense scrutiny, her rehearsed answers felt hollow. "Because it's not just my dream," she said finally. "It's a chance to give hope to people who've been told there's none. People like—" She stopped herself, unsure if she should say more. "People like me," Grant finished for her, his voice tinged with bitterness. The silence that followed was heavy. Veronica felt the weight of his words, the unspoken pain behind them. She wanted to say something, to bridge the gap between them, but before she could, Grant spoke again. "I'll fund your research," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. Veronica's eyes widened. "You will?" "But there's a condition," he continued, his gaze locking onto hers. "You'll marry me." The words hung in the air, shocking and surreal. Veronica stared at him, unsure if she had heard correctly. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Grant said, his expression unreadable. "Marry me for 1 year. In return, I'll give you the funding you need." Veronica's mind raced. This had to be a joke, some kind of test. "Why would you want to marry me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Grant's lips curved into a faint, humorless smile. Let's just say it's a mutually beneficial arrangement. You get your funding, and I get companionship. Someone to stand by my side in public, to silence the rumors and speculation about my personal life. Veronica's heart pounded. This was insane. She had come here to pitch her research, not to become someone's wife. But as she looked into Grant's eyes, she saw something she hadn't expected. Loneliness. Beneath his cold exterior was a man who had built walls so high that no one could reach him. "And if I say no?" she asked, her voice trembling. Grant's expression hardened. "Then you walk away with nothing. No funding. No second chances." Veronica felt like the ground had been pulled out from under her. This was her dream, her life's work. Could she really walk away from it? But could she agree to something so unorthodox? The room seemed to close in around her as she weighed her options. This wasn't just a business deal. It was a gamble that could change her life forever. What would you do if you were in Veronica's shoes? Would you take the deal? Let us know in the comments below. The small Midwestern town of Maplewood was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and dreams rarely stretched beyond the horizon of cornfields and factory jobs. For Veronica Pierce, it was home, but it was also a place that taught her life's harshest lessons far too early. Her father, a charming but unreliable man, had walked out on the family when Veronica was just 6 years old. She could still remember the sound of the screen door slamming shut and the sight of her mother standing in the doorway, holding back tears as she told Veronica and her younger brother Ethan that everything would be okay. But it wasn't. Her mother, a waitress at the local diner, worked double shifts to keep food on the table and the lights on. Veronica often found herself playing the role of a second parent to Ethan, helping him with homework and tucking him into bed while their mother worked late into the night. The absence of her father left a deep scar on Veronica. It wasn't just the abandonment, it was the broken promises. He had promised to come back, to take her to the park, to be there for her school play, but he never did. Over time, Veronica learned not to trust words, only actions. This lesson would shape her relationships for the rest of her life. Despite the hardships, Veronica was determined to rise above her circumstances. She was a bright, curious child who excelled in school, often earning top marks in science and math. Her teachers saw her potential and encouraged her to dream big, but dreaming big in Maplewood felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. Still, Veronica clung to the hope that education would be her ticket out of the cycle of struggle. Her brother, Ethan, was her greatest source of joy and her deepest heartbreak. He was a sweet, energetic boy who loved to draw and had a laugh that could light up a room. But when Ethan was 10, he began to experience strange symptoms, tremors in his hands, difficulty walking, and chronic fatigue. After months of tests and hospital visits, the diagnosis came. Ethan had a rare degenerative disease that would slowly rob him of his mobility and, eventually, his life. Veronica was just 15 at the time, but the weight of the diagnosis hit her like a freight train. She watched helplessly as her brother's condition worsened, his once bright spirit dimming under the weight of his illness. The medical bills piled up, and her mother's exhaustion turned into quiet despair. Veronica vowed that one day she would find a way to help people like Ethan, people who were told there was no hope. Ethan passed away when Veronica was 17. His death was a turning point for her, solidifying her resolve to pursue a career in medicine. She threw herself into her studies, earning a full scholarship to a prestigious university where she majored in biomedical engineering. It was there that she discovered her passion for regenerative medicine, a field that held the promise of repairing damaged tissues and restoring lost functions. Veronica's professors were impressed by her intellect and drive, but they also noticed her tendency to keep people at arm's length. She was friendly but guarded, always polite but never fully open. The truth was, Veronica had built walls around her heart, walls that even she didn't fully understand. Her romantic history was a series of disappointments that only reinforced her belief that love was a distraction she couldn't afford. In college, she dated a fellow student named Ryan, a charming pre-med major who seemed to understand her ambition. But as their relationship progressed, Ryan's support turned into resentment. He accused her of prioritizing her studies over their relationship, and when she refused to compromise her goals, he ended things. After Ryan, there were a few other relationships, but none of them lasted. One man, a venture capitalist named Mark, seemed promising at first. He was older, successful, and supportive of her work, or so she thought. When Veronica discovered that Mark had been using her research to pitch his own business ideas to investors, she ended the relationship immediately. The betrayal stung, but it also confirmed what she had always suspected. People couldn't be trusted to put her needs above their own. By the time Veronica reached her late 20s, she had stopped looking for love altogether. Her work became her sole focus, and she quickly rose to prominence in the field of regenerative medicine. She published groundbreaking research papers, secured competitive grants, and even started her own lab. But despite her professional success, there was a part of her that felt hollow. She told herself it didn't matter, that the lives she could save through her work were more important than her own happiness. When Grant Harlow's invitation to the charity gala arrived, Veronica saw it as an opportunity to take her research to the next level. Harlow Biotech was one of the most influential companies in the world, and a partnership with them could provide the funding and resources she needed to turn her ideas into reality. But as she prepared for the gala, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into a lion's den. Grant Harlow was a man of immense power and influence, but he was also known for his ruthlessness. Veronica had read the articles about him, the reclusive CEO who had built an empire from nothing, the man who rarely appeared in public and never gave interviews. She had also heard the rumors about his personal life, the whispers about his tragic accident, and the fiancée who had left him afterward. Veronica told herself she wasn't intimidated. She had faced bigger challenges in her life, and she wasn't about to let fear hold her back. But as she stood in front of the mirror on the night of the gala, adjusting the emerald green dress she had borrowed from a friend, she felt a pang of doubt. Was she really ready to step into Grant Harlow's world? The proposal Grant made that night shook her to her core. Marry him for 1 year in exchange for $1 billion investment in her research? It was a deal that could change her life, but it also went against everything she believed in. Veronica had always prided herself on her integrity, on earning her success through hard work and determination. Could she really compromise her values for the sake of her dream? As she lay awake that night, replaying Grant's words in her mind, Veronica felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She thought of Ethan, of the promise she had made to herself all those years ago. This wasn't just about her. It was about the lives she could save, the hope she could give to people who had none. But at what cost? The question lingered unanswered as Veronica stared at the ceiling, her heart and mind at war. The roar of the crowd was deafening, the stadium lights blinding as they reflected off the polished track. Grant Harlow stood at the starting line, his heart pounding with adrenaline. At 21, he was already a rising star in the world of track and field, a sprinter with Olympic dreams. His coaches called him a prodigy, his competitors feared him, and the media adored him. But for Grant, it wasn't about the fame or the accolades. It was about the freedom he felt when he ran, the wind against his face, the power in his legs, the sense that nothing in the world could hold him back. That freedom was ripped away in an instant. It was a rainy night, just a week after he had qualified for the Olympic trials. Grant had been driving home from a celebratory dinner with his teammates when a truck ran a red light and slammed into his car. The impact was catastrophic. He woke up in a hospital bed days later, his body broken and his future shattered. The doctors told him he was lucky to be alive, but their words felt hollow when they delivered the devastating news. He would never walk again. The months that followed were a blur of pain, anger, and despair. Grant, once a symbol of strength and vitality, was now confined to a wheelchair. He pushed away everyone who tried to help him, his family, his friends, even his fiancée, Lauren. She had been his high school sweetheart, the girl who had cheered him on at every race. But the accident changed everything. At first she tried to be supportive, but as the reality of his condition set in, her patience wore thin. One night, after yet another argument, she left. "I can't do this anymore," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry, Grant, but I can't watch you destroy yourself." Her departure was the final blow. Grant had lost his dreams, his independence, and now the woman he thought he would spend his life with. He sank into a deep depression, retreating into himself and shutting out the world. But Grant Harlow was not a man who stayed down for long. One day, during a particularly grueling physical therapy session, he had an epiphany. If he couldn't run, he would find another way to make an impact. He had always been fascinated by science, particularly the way the human body worked. What if he could use his experience to help others? What if he could turn his pain into purpose? That spark of determination ignited a fire within him. Grant threw himself into his studies, earning a degree in biomedical engineering, and later an MBA. He founded Harlow Biotech with a singular mission: to develop cutting-edge medical technologies that could improve the lives of people with disabilities. His first major breakthrough was a revolutionary exoskeleton that allowed paraplegics to regain some mobility. The product was a massive success, catapulting Harlow Biotech to the forefront of the industry and making Grant a billionaire. But success came at a cost. The more powerful Grant became, the more he realized how many people were willing to exploit him. Investors, business partners, even friends. Many of them saw him not as a person but as a means to an end. The betrayal he felt when Lauren left him had been painful, but the betrayals he experienced in the corporate world were a different kind of wound. They taught him to be cautious, to trust no one, and to keep his emotions tightly guarded. Grant's public persona became one of cold efficiency. He was known as a brilliant but ruthless businessman, a man who demanded perfection and tolerated no excuses. In private, however, he was a different man. The walls he had built around himself were not just to keep others out. They were to protect the fragile parts of himself that he couldn't afford to show. He still dreamed of running. In his dreams he could feel the ground beneath his feet, the wind in his hair, but when he woke up, the reality of his condition hit him like a punch to the gut. He hated the pitying looks people gave him, the way they spoke to him as if he were fragile. He hated the loneliness most of all. It was that loneliness that led him to make the proposal to Veronica Pierce. Grant had been following Veronica's work for months. Her research in regenerative medicine was groundbreaking, and he admired her tenacity and intellect, but what intrigued him most was her story. He had read about her brother, about the struggle she had faced growing up, and he saw a kindred spirit in her. Like him, she had turned her pain into purpose. When he invited her to the charity gala, he had already made up his mind. He would offer her the funding she needed, but on one condition: she would marry him. The proposal wasn't just about business. Yes, he believed in her work and wanted to support it, but there was more to it than that. Grant was tired of being alone. He wanted someone by his side, someone who could see past his wealth and his wheelchair to the man he truly was. He didn't expect love. He wasn't naive enough to believe in fairy tales, but he hoped for companionship, for a connection that went beyond the superficial. The marriage would be a test not just for Veronica but for himself. Could he let someone into his life again? Could he trust her not to hurt him the way others had? When Veronica hesitated, Grant felt a pang of doubt. Maybe he had misjudged her. Maybe she wasn't the person he thought she was. But then he saw the determination in her eyes, the same determination that had driven him to rebuild his life after the accident. "You don't have to decide now," he told her. "But if you say yes, I promise you won't regret it." As he watched her leave the gala that night, Grant felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. The room was silent except for the faint scratching of a pen against paper. Veronica Pierce sat at the long mahogany table in Grant Harlow's private study, her hand trembling slightly as she signed her name on the final page of the contract. Across from her, Grant watched her with an unreadable expression, his sharp blue eyes fixed on her every movement. The contract was as cold and clinical as the man who had written it. It outlined every detail of their arrangement. Veronica would act as Grant's wife in public, attend events with him, and live in his mansion for 1 year. In return, she would receive $1 billion investment in her research, no strings attached. There were clauses about discretion, appearances, and even a stipulation that she could not discuss the nature of their agreement with anyone. As she set the pen down, Veronica felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, apprehension, and a gnawing sense of unease. She had spent the past week agonizing over her decision, weighing her moral values against the opportunity of a lifetime. In the end, her dream of revolutionizing regenerative medicine had won out. But as she looked up at Grant, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just made a deal with the devil. "It's done," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. Grant nodded, his expression still impassive. "Welcome to the family, Mrs. Harlow." The words felt hollow, almost mocking. There was no warmth in his tone, no hint of the intimacy that the title Mrs. Harlow implied. This wasn't a marriage, it was a transaction, plain and simple. The next morning, Veronica arrived at Grant's estate with a single suitcase in hand. She had expected the mansion to be grand, but nothing could have prepared her for the sheer scale of it. The sprawling property sat atop a hill, surrounded by manicured gardens and a private lake that glittered in the sunlight. The mansion itself was a masterpiece of modern architecture, all glass and steel, with sharp angles and towering windows that offered breathtaking views of the surrounding countryside. But as Veronica stepped inside, she was struck by how cold and lifeless the house felt. The walls were bare, the furniture minimalist to the point of sterility. It was a house designed for function, not comfort, a reflection, she realized, of the man who lived there. "Good morning, Mrs. Harlow," a voice said, pulling her from her thoughts. Veronica turned to see a middle-aged woman in a crisp black uniform. Her hair was pulled back into a tight bun, and her expression was polite but distant. "I'm Margaret, the house manager," the woman said. "If you need anything, please don't hesitate to ask." "Thank you, Margaret," Veronica replied, offering a small smile. Margaret led her through the house, pointing out the various rooms, the library, the gym, the indoor pool, the dining hall that could seat 20 people. It was all so overwhelming, so impersonal. When they finally reached her bedroom, Veronica was relieved to find that it was at least warm and inviting, with soft lighting and a view of the lake. As she unpacked her suitcase, she couldn't help but feel like an intruder. This wasn't her home. It was Grant's fortress, a place where he could keep the world at bay. That evening, Veronica joined Grant for dinner in the formal dining room. The table was absurdly long, and they sat at opposite ends, the distance between them only adding to the awkwardness. The meal was prepared by a private chef and served by Margaret, but Veronica barely tasted the food. Her attention was focused on Grant, who ate in silence, his gaze fixed on his plate. "Is it always this quiet around here?" she asked, breaking the silence. Grant looked up, his expression unreadable. "I prefer it that way." Veronica resisted the urge to roll her eyes. "Well, I don't. If we're going to be living together for the next year, we might as well try to get to know each other." Grant set his fork down and leaned back in his chair, studying her. "What do you want to know?" She hesitated, caught off guard by his directness. "I don't know. What do you do for fun?" A faint, humorless smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "Fun isn't exactly a priority for me." Clearly, she muttered under her breath. Grant's eyes narrowed. "If you have something to say, Veronica, say it." She met his gaze, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "Fine, you brought me here into your world, and now you're acting like I'm some kind of inconvenience. If you didn't want me here, why did you make the proposal in the first place?" For a moment, Grant said nothing. Then he leaned forward, his voice low and measured. "I made the proposal because I need someone I can trust. Someone who won't stab me in the back the moment it's convenient. But trust has to be earned, Veronica, and right now, I don't know if I can trust you." His words stung, but Veronica refused to back down. "Trust goes both ways, Grant. If you want me to be your wife, even if it's just for show, you're going to have to let me in. Otherwise, this arrangement is going to be a very long year for both of us." Grant held her gaze for a long moment before finally nodding. "Fair enough." The tension between them was palpable, but there was also a flicker of something else. Respect, perhaps? Or the faintest hint of understanding. As Veronica lay in bed that night, staring up at the ceiling, she couldn't stop replaying their conversation in her mind. Grant was a hard man to read, his emotions buried beneath layers of control and detachment. But there was something about him that intrigued her, something that made her want to break through his walls. She didn't know if it was curiosity, compassion, or something else entirely, but one thing was certain. This was going to be the most challenging year of her life. The mansion was quiet, the kind of silence that felt heavy and oppressive. Veronica couldn't sleep. She had spent the past few days adjusting to her new life as Mrs. Harlow, but the coldness of the house and of Grant himself made it hard to feel at ease. She wandered into the library, a sprawling room filled with floor-to-ceiling shelves of books that looked like they had never been touched. She wasn't expecting to find Grant there. He was seated by the fireplace, his wheelchair angled toward the flames. The warm light softened his sharp features, making him look less like the intimidating CEO she had come to know, and more like a man lost in thought. He didn't notice her at first, and for a moment she considered leaving him alone. But something about the way he stared into the fire, his expression distant and almost haunted, made her stay. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked softly, stepping into the room. Grant turned his head, his eyes narrowing slightly before he nodded. "Something like that." Veronica hesitated, then walked over to the armchair across from him. She sat down, folding her legs beneath her. "Do you come here often?" "Sometimes," he said, his voice low. "It's one of the few places in this house that feels quiet." She tilted her head, studying him. "You don't strike me as someone who minds the quiet." Grant let out a humorless chuckle. "You're right, I don't. But there's a difference between quiet and loneliness." The admission surprised her. It was the first time he had said something that felt truly vulnerable, and it caught her off guard. "Do you ever feel lonely?" he asked suddenly, his gaze locking onto hers. Veronica hesitated, the question hitting closer to home than she expected. "I think everyone does at some point," she said carefully. "But I've learned to live with it. I guess I've always been better at being alone than relying on people." Grant's expression softened just slightly. "Why?" She took a deep breath, debating whether to tell him the truth. But something about the way he was looking at her, like he genuinely wanted to understand, made her open up. "When I was a kid, my dad left," she began, her voice steady but quiet. "It was just me, my mom, and my little brother, Ethan. My mom worked all the time to keep us afloat, so I had to grow up fast. I took care of Ethan, helped him with his homework, made sure he was okay. But when he got sick—" She paused, her throat tightening. "When he got sick, there was nothing I could do to help him. I felt so helpless, and after he died, I promised myself I'd never feel that way again. That's why I do what I do. That's why I said yes to your proposal." Grant was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on her. "I'm sorry about your brother," he said finally, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "Thank you," she said, her eyes meeting his. "What about you? Why do you do what you do?" He hesitated, his jaw tightening. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer, but then he spoke. "I used to run," he said, his voice tinged with a mix of nostalgia and bitterness. "I was a sprinter, fastest in the state. I had dreams of going to the Olympics, but then the accident happened and all of that was taken away from me. I thought my life was over, but then I realized if I couldn't run, I could still make a difference. I could help people like me, people who had lost something they thought they could never get back." Veronica felt a pang of empathy. She had always seen Grant as cold and unfeeling, but now she realized how much pain he carried beneath the surface. "You've done more than help," she said softly. "You've changed lives." Grant looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Maybe, but it doesn't change the fact that I'm still stuck in this chair." The vulnerability in his voice was almost too much to bear. Veronica wanted to say something, to comfort him, but she didn't know how. Instead, she reached across the small table between them and placed her hand on his. It was a small gesture, but it felt significant. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't heavy this time. It was warm, almost comforting. A week later, Veronica found herself standing beside Grant at a high-profile charity event. The room was packed with influential figures, all eager to rub shoulders with the elusive CEO of Harlow Biotech. Veronica had been nervous about the event, but Grant had assured her that all she had to do was smile and play the part of the supportive wife. It was easier said than done. As they made their way through the crowd, Veronica could feel the weight of the stares and whispers. People were curious about her, about the woman who had suddenly appeared at Grant Harlow's side. She tried to ignore it, focusing instead on Grant, who seemed unfazed by the attention. But then, as they stopped to speak with a group of investors, one man made a comment that sent a chill down her spine. "It's good to see you out and about, Grant," the man said, his tone dripping with condescension. "I was starting to think you'd given up on the whole public image thing, and I see you've brought company." The way he said it made Veronica's blood boil. She could feel Grant tense beside her, his jaw tightening, but he said nothing. Veronica, however, couldn't stay silent. "With all due respect," she said, her voice calm but firm, "Grant doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. He's accomplished more in his life than most people could in 10 lifetimes, and as for me, I'm not just company, I'm his wife. So if you have something to say, I suggest you say it with a little more respect." The man's face turned red and he stammered out an apology before quickly excusing himself. Grant turned to Veronica, his expression a mix of surprise and admiration. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. "Yes, I did," she replied, meeting his gaze. "No one talks to you like that, not while I'm around." For the first time she saw a genuine smile on Grant's face. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. "Thank you," he said, his voice soft. In that moment, Veronica realized something had shifted between them. The walls they had both built were starting to crack, just a little. Have you ever stood up for someone you care about? Share your story in the comments below. The hum of the lab equipment was the only sound in the room as Veronica stared at the results on her computer screen. Her heart raced as the data confirmed what she had been hoping for: a breakthrough. After months of research and countless sleepless nights, she had developed a potential treatment that could help regenerate damaged nerve tissue. It wasn't a cure, but it could restore some mobility to patients with spinal cord injuries. Her mind immediately went to Grant. She had seen the way he looked at the world, the way he carried the weight of his condition like a shield. He rarely spoke about it, but she could feel the frustration simmering beneath his calm exterior. This treatment could change everything for him. It could give him back a piece of the life he had lost. But as the excitement coursed through her, doubt crept in. Would he even consider it? Grant wasn't the type to get his hopes up easily, and she knew how much he hated feeling vulnerable. Still, she had to try. That evening she found him in the library, his usual retreat. He was reading a book, but he looked up when she entered, his expression softening slightly. "Do you have a minute?" she asked, her voice tinged with nervous energy. Grant closed the book and gestured for her to sit. "What's on your mind?" Veronica took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I've been working on something in the lab. It's a new treatment, an experimental therapy that could help regenerate nerve tissue. It's still in the early stages, but the preliminary results are promising." Grant's expression didn't change, but she could see the flicker of interest in his eyes. "And you think it could help me?" "I do," she said, leaning forward. "It's not a cure, but it could restore some mobility. Maybe even enough for you to stand or take a few steps. I know it's a lot to take in, but I really believe this could work." For a moment, Grant said nothing. He stared at her, his jaw tight, his hands resting on the arms of his wheelchair. "I appreciate what you're trying to do," he said finally, his voice measured. "But I've been down this road before. I've tried treatments, therapies, surgeries. None of them worked. I'm not sure I can go through that again." Veronica's heart sank. "Grant, I understand why you're hesitant, but this is different. This isn't just another therapy. It's something new, something that could really make a difference." He shook his head, his gaze dropping to the floor. "You don't understand. Every time I've tried something, I've let myself hope, and every time that hope has been crushed. I can't do that again, Veronica. I can't let myself believe in something that might not work." The vulnerability in his voice broke her heart. She wanted to reach out to him, to tell him that it was okay to hope, but she knew he wasn't ready to hear it. "Just think about it," she said softly. "That's all I'm asking." Grant nodded, but his expression remained guarded. "I'll think about it." A few days later, Veronica was in the lab discussing the treatment with one of her colleagues, Dr. Harris. They were going over the logistics of the therapy, debating the best way to approach Grant about participating in the trial. "I just don't know if he'll agree to it," Veronica admitted, her voice tinged with frustration. "He's so afraid of being disappointed again. I don't blame him, but I wish he could see how much this could help him." Dr. Harris nodded sympathetically. "It's a tough situation, but if anyone can convince him, it's you. You've already done so much for him." Veronica sighed. "I just hope he doesn't think I'm doing this for the money. I know that's how this all started, but it's not about that anymore. I care about him, Harris, more than I ever expected to." Unbeknownst to her, Grant had entered the lab and overheard the last part of the conversation. He stood frozen in the doorway, his mind racing. The words, "I just hope he doesn't think I'm doing this for the money," echoed in his head, drowning out everything else. To him, it sounded like confirmation of his worst fears, that Veronica's motivations were still tied to the billion-dollar deal. The growing trust he had started to feel for her crumbled in an instant. Without saying a word, he turned and left, his chest tight with anger and betrayal. That evening, Veronica found Grant in his study, his expression colder than she had ever seen it. "Grant, I wanted to talk to you about—" "Save it," he interrupted, his voice sharp. "I heard everything I needed to hear earlier." Veronica frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" "I heard you in the lab," he said, his tone laced with bitterness. "Talking about how you hope I don't think you're doing this for the money. Well, guess what, Veronica? That's exactly what I think. This whole thing, our marriage, your so-called concern for me, it's all about the money, isn't it?" Her heart sank as his words hit her like a slap. "Grant, that's not true. You're twisting my words." "Am I?" he shot back, his eyes blazing. "Because from where I'm standing it seems pretty clear. You're just like everyone else, using me for what I can give you." Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You don't know what you're talking about. Yes, I agreed to this marriage for the funding, but that's not why I'm doing this now. I care about you, Grant. I care about helping you." He scoffed, his expression hard. "I don't need your pity, Veronica, and I don't need you pretending to care about me." The words cut deep, and Veronica felt her resolve falter. "You're right," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "You don't need me, but I thought maybe, just maybe, you wanted me here. I guess I was wrong." Without another word, she turned and walked out of the room, her heart heavy with hurt and frustration. The days that followed were tense and silent. Grant retreated further into himself, avoiding Veronica whenever possible. She, in turn, threw herself into her work, using the lab as an escape from the pain of their argument. Both of them were haunted by their own doubts and insecurities. Grant couldn't shake the fear that he had let himself trust someone who would ultimately betray him. Veronica, meanwhile, questioned whether she had made a mistake in agreeing to the marriage in the first place. But beneath the anger and hurt, there was something neither of them could ignore, a growing sense of loss. Despite their differences, they had started to rely on each other in ways they hadn't expected, and now, with that connection fractured, they both felt the weight of its absence. The tension between Grant and Veronica had reached a breaking point. Days had turned into a week of silence, with neither willing to bridge the chasm that had formed between them. Grant buried himself in work, retreating to his study and avoiding any interaction with Veronica. She, in turn, spent her days in the lab, pouring her energy into perfecting the experimental treatment, but the weight of their unresolved argument hung heavy in the air, a constant reminder of the fragile state of their relationship. Veronica knew she couldn't let things end like this. She cared too much about Grant to walk away, and she believed in the treatment she had developed. But she also knew that words alone wouldn't be enough to convince him. She needed to show him that her intentions were genuine, that she wasn't just another person trying to use him. The opportunity came during a meeting with the board of Harlow Biotech. Veronica had been invited to present her research, but she quickly realized that the board members were more interested in the financial implications of her work than its potential to change lives. "This treatment has the potential to revolutionize regenerative medicine," Veronica said, her voice steady but impassioned. "It could restore mobility to people who have been told they'll never walk again, but I need your support to move forward with the clinical trials." One of the board members, a man with a sharp suit and an even sharper tongue, leaned back in his chair and smirked. "And what makes you so sure this will work? We've seen plenty of promising treatments fail before. Why should we invest in something so risky?" Veronica's jaw tightened, but she refused to back down. "Because this isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. This is about giving people hope, people like Grant." The room fell silent at the mention of Grant's name. Veronica took a deep breath and continued. "I know you're all focused on the bottom line, but this isn't just a business decision. It's a chance to make a real difference, and if you won't approve the funding, I'll find another way to make it happen. I'll go to other investors, other companies. But I won't give up on this." Her words hung in the air, a challenge and a promise. The board members exchanged glances, clearly taken aback by her determination. Unbeknownst to Veronica, Grant had been listening from outside the room. He had come to the meeting intending to observe, but her words stopped him in his tracks. He stood there, hidden from view, as she fought for him with a passion and sincerity that left him speechless. When the meeting ended, Veronica stepped out into the hallway, her heart still racing. She nearly collided with Grant, who was waiting for her just outside the door. "Grant," she said, startled, "what are you doing here?" "I heard what you said," he replied, his voice quiet but filled with emotion. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," she said firmly, "because I believe in this treatment, and I believe in you." For a moment, Grant said nothing. He simply looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then, to her surprise, he reached out and took her hand. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I was wrong to doubt you. I let my own fears and insecurities get in the way, and I hurt you." "You didn't deserve that." Veronica felt a lump rise in her throat. "Grant, I understand why you were hesitant. But I need you to know that this isn't just about the treatment or the funding. I care about you. I care about helping you, not because of some deal we made, but because I see the man you are, and I want to see you happy." Grant's grip on her hand tightened, and for the first time she saw the walls he had built around himself begin to crumble. "You've done more for me than anyone ever has," he said softly. "And I don't just mean the treatment. You've made me feel seen, like I'm more than just the man in the wheelchair." "You are," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The moment hung between them, heavy with unspoken emotions. Then, slowly, Grant leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. It wasn't a grand, sweeping gesture, but it was enough to convey what words couldn't. The next day, Grant agreed to undergo the experimental treatment. Veronica explained the procedure in detail, making sure he understood the risks and the potential outcomes. "It's not going to be an instant fix," she warned him. "The results will take time, and there's no guarantee it will work, but I believe in this, Grant, and I believe in you." He nodded, his expression resolute. "Let's do it." The procedure took place in a private medical facility, with Veronica overseeing every step. As she administered the treatment, she couldn't help but feel a mix of hope and anxiety. This was more than just a professional milestone for her, it was personal. Grant remained calm throughout the procedure, his trust in Veronica evident. When it was over, he looked up at her and gave her a small, reassuring smile. "No matter what happens, thank you," he said. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of physical therapy and monitoring. At first, there were no noticeable changes, and Grant's initial optimism began to waver. But Veronica refused to let him give up. She was there for every session, encouraging him, pushing him to keep going. Then one day, it happened. Grant was in the therapy room working with his physical therapist when he felt a faint tingling sensation in his legs. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. "Did you feel that?" the therapist asked, his voice filled with excitement. Grant nodded, his eyes wide with disbelief. "I did." Veronica, who had been watching from the sidelines, rushed over, her heart pounding. "Grant, this is just the beginning," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. Over the next few sessions, the progress continued. The tingling sensation grew stronger, and Grant was able to move his toes for the first time in years. It wasn't much, but it was enough to reignite his hope. One evening, as they sat together in the garden, Grant turned to Veronica and said, "You were right. It's okay to hope." She smiled, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I never doubted it for a second. In that moment, they both realized that their relationship had evolved into something far deeper than either of them had anticipated. It wasn't just about the treatment or the deal. They had found something real, something worth fighting for. The garden was bathed in the soft glow of twilight, the last rays of the sun casting a golden hue over the sprawling estate. Veronica and Grant sat side by side on a stone bench near the edge of the lake, the gentle rustling of leaves and the distant chirping of crickets creating a serene backdrop. It had been weeks since Grant's treatment, and while the progress had been slow, it was undeniable. For the first time in years, Grant felt something he hadn't dared to hope for: control. The faint tingling in his legs had grown stronger, and with each physical therapy session, he could feel his body responding in ways he thought were lost to him forever. Veronica glanced at him, her heart swelling with pride and affection. He looked different now, not just physically, but emotionally. The guarded, distant man she had first met was slowly giving way to someone softer, someone who allowed himself to hope. "You've been quiet," she said, breaking the comfortable silence. "What's on your mind?" Grant turned to her, his piercing blue eyes meeting hers. "I was just thinking about how far we've come," he said, his voice low and thoughtful. "A few months ago I never would have imagined sitting here like this, with you." Veronica smiled, her cheeks warming. "I think we've both come a long way." He nodded, his gaze drifting to the lake. "You've changed me, Veronica, in more ways than I can explain." She reached out and placed her hand on his, their fingers intertwining. "You've changed me too, Grant, more than I ever thought possible." For a moment they sat in silence, the weight of their unspoken emotions hanging in the air. Then Grant shifted, his expression turning serious. "There's something I want to try," he said, his voice tinged with both determination and vulnerability. Veronica's brow furrowed. "What is it?" He hesitated, then gestured to the cane resting beside him. "I want to try standing. On my own." Her heart skipped a beat. "Grant, are you sure? You don't have to push yourself." "I'm ready," he said firmly, cutting her off. "I need to do this, Veronica, for myself. And for you." She nodded, her throat tightening with emotion. "Okay, I'm here. I'll help you." Grant took a deep breath, his hands gripping the armrests of the bench. Veronica moved to his side, her hands hovering near him, ready to catch him if he faltered. Slowly he pushed himself up, his arms trembling with the effort. For a moment it seemed like he might not make it, but then with a final surge of strength he rose to his feet. Veronica gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Grant, you're standing." He looked down at his legs, a mixture of disbelief and triumph on his face. "I'm standing," he echoed, his voice barely above a whisper. Tears filled Veronica's eyes as she watched him take a tentative step forward, the cane providing support, but his legs carrying him for the first time in years. It wasn't perfect, his movements were shaky and he had to pause after each step, but it was progress. It was hope. When he finally sat back down, his chest heaving with exertion, Veronica threw her arms around him, her tears spilling onto his shoulder. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. Grant held her tightly, his own eyes glistening. "I couldn't have done it without you." Later that evening they found themselves lying on a blanket in the middle of the garden, the stars twinkling above them like scattered diamonds. The air was cool, but the warmth of their shared moment kept the chill at bay. Veronica turned her head to look at Grant, her heart swelling as she took in the relaxed expression on his face. He looked at peace, a stark contrast to the man she had first met. "Do you ever think about how all of this started?" she asked, her voice soft. He chuckled, a low, rich sound that sent a shiver down her spine. "You mean the part where I blackmailed you into marrying me?" She laughed, shaking her head. "I wouldn't call it blackmail, more like an unconventional business arrangement." Grant turned to her, his expression serious now. "It was more than that, even then. I didn't realize it at the time, but I think I needed you more than I was willing to admit. Not just for the deal, but for me." Veronica's breath caught in her throat. "Grant?" He reached out, his hand brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You've given me so much, Veronica. Not just the treatment, but hope. You've made me believe in things I thought I'd lost forever, and somewhere along the way I fell in love with you." Her heart swelled, the words she had been longing to hear filling her with a warmth she couldn't describe. "I love you too, Grant," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I didn't expect to, but I do. You've shown me that love doesn't have to be a distraction. It can be a strength." He smiled, his eyes shining with a mixture of joy and relief. "You've made me stronger, Veronica, in every way that matters." They leaned toward each other, their lips meeting in a kiss that was both tender and passionate. It was a kiss that spoke of everything they had been through, of the walls they had broken down, and of the future they were beginning to build together. As they pulled apart, Grant rested his forehead against hers, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Veronica smiled, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "Thank you for letting me in." The night stretched on, the stars above bearing witness to the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. For the first time, both Grant and Veronica felt truly free, free from the pain of their pasts, free to hope, and free to love. The morning started like any other. Veronica was in the kitchen, sipping her coffee and scrolling through her emails, while Grant was in his study, preparing for a meeting with his board. The house was quiet, peaceful, a stark contrast to the storm that was about to hit. It began with a phone call. Margaret, the house manager, rushed into the kitchen, her face pale. "Mrs. Harlow, you need to see this," she said, holding out her phone. Veronica frowned, taking the device. Her heart sank as she read the headline splashed across the screen. "Billionaire CEO Grant Harlow's marriage exposed as a business deal. Wife accused of gold-digging scheme." Her stomach churned as she scrolled through the article. It detailed their marriage contract, complete with leaked excerpts that painted her as a manipulative opportunist who had married Grant solely for his money. The article was filled with speculation and venom, accusing her of exploiting his vulnerability and tarnishing his reputation. Veronica's hands trembled as she set the phone down. "How did they find out?" she whispered, more to herself than to Margaret. "I don't know," Margaret said, her voice laced with concern. "But it's everywhere, the tabloids, social media. Everyone's talking about it." Veronica's mind raced. She had always known the contract was a risk, but she had never imagined it would come to light like this. Her first thought was of Grant. How would he react? As if on cue, Grant appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. He held a tablet in his hand, the same headline glaring back at her. "Grant, she began, but he held up a hand to stop her. "I know," he said, his voice calm but cold. "I've seen it." Veronica's heart ached at the distance in his tone. "I don't know how this happened, but I swear, I had nothing to do with it." "I believe you," he said, surprising her. "But that doesn't change the fact that this is a disaster. My reputation, the company, everything is at risk now." "And what about us?" she asked, her voice trembling. Grant's gaze softened, but only slightly. "That depends on how we handle this." The hours that followed were a whirlwind of chaos. Reporters camped outside the estate, shouting questions and snapping photos whenever anyone came or went. Social media was ablaze with speculation, with some people defending Veronica and others tearing her apart. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere was tense. Grant's PR team worked frantically to contain the damage, but the story was already out and the public was hungry for more. Veronica felt like she was drowning. Everywhere she turned there was another accusation, another cruel comment. She had worked so hard to build her career, to prove herself, and now it felt like everything was crumbling around her. But what hurt the most was the thought of losing Grant. Despite everything, she loved him, and the idea that this scandal might drive a wedge between them was almost too much to bear. That evening, as the chaos continued to swirl around them, Grant found Veronica in the garden. She was sitting on the same stone bench where he had taken his first unaided step, her head in her hands. "Veronica," he said softly, and she looked up, her eyes red from crying. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I never wanted this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you." Grant sat down beside her, his expression unreadable. "I know," he said. "And I'm sorry too. I should have been more careful. I should have protected you better." She shook her head. This isn't your fault, it's mine. I agreed to the contract. I put us in this position." Grant reached out and took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "We both made that decision, and now we're going to face the consequences. Together." Veronica looked at him, her heart swelling with a mixture of relief and love. "What are we going to do?" "We're going to tell the truth," he said simply. The next day, Grant and Veronica held a press conference at the Harlow Biotech headquarters. The room was packed with reporters, their cameras flashing as the couple took their seats at the front of the room. Grant was the first to speak. He addressed the crowd with his usual calm authority, his voice steady and unwavering. "Yes, it's true that Veronica and I entered into a marriage contract," he said, his gaze sweeping over the room. "At the time it was a business arrangement, but what the tabloids fail to mention is that our relationship has grown into something far more meaningful." He turned to Veronica, his expression softening. "Veronica is one of the most intelligent, compassionate, and driven people I've ever met. She has dedicated her life to helping others, and she has changed mine in ways I never thought possible. I love her. And I'm not ashamed to say that." The room erupted into murmurs, the reporters scribbling furiously in their notebooks. Veronica took a deep breath and leaned into the microphone. "When I first agreed to the contract, I did it because I believed in my work and in the opportunity Grant was offering me. But over time, I came to see the man behind the title. Grant is more than just a CEO or a billionaire. He's kind, he's resilient, and he's someone I'm proud to stand beside. I love him too." The murmurs grew louder, but this time there was a different tone, one of curiosity and perhaps respect. Grant leaned forward, his gaze steady. "We're not perfect, we've made mistakes, but we're committed to each other, and we're committed to moving forward." The press conference didn't erase the scandal overnight, but it shifted the narrative. People began to see Grant and Veronica not as a calculated business deal, but as two people who had found love in an unexpected way. Over the following weeks, the media frenzy died down, and life slowly returned to normal. Grant and Veronica grew closer than ever, their bond strengthened by the challenges they had faced together. One evening, as they sat in the garden, Grant took Veronica's hand and said, "I don't care what the world thinks. As long as I have you, I have everything I need." Veronica smiled, her heart full. "And I have you. That's all that matters." The weeks following the press conference were a whirlwind of change, but for the first time in a long time, Grant and Veronica felt a sense of peace. The media frenzy that had once consumed their lives began to fade, replaced by a quieter, more supportive narrative. Headlines shifted from scandal to redemption, with stories focusing on their love story and the groundbreaking work Veronica was doing in regenerative medicine. The mansion, once cold and sterile, now felt alive. Veronica had insisted on adding personal touches, fresh flowers in the hallways, family photos on the walls, and a cozy reading nook in the library where they often spent their evenings together. The house no longer felt like a fortress, it felt like a home. Grant's progress with the treatment continued to improve. He was now able to take several steps with the help of a cane, and his physical therapist was optimistic about further recovery. But for Grant, the real victory wasn't just regaining mobility. It was the sense of hope and purpose that Veronica had brought into his life. One evening, as they sat together in the garden, Grant turned to Veronica with a thoughtful expression. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice steady. "About what?" she asked, leaning into him. "About us," he replied, "about how far we've come, and about how I want to spend the rest of my life with you, not because of a contract, but because I love you." Veronica's heart swelled, tears springing to her eyes. "Grant." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed a simple yet elegant diamond ring. "Veronica Pierce Harlow, will you marry me? For real this time?" She laughed through her tears, nodding as she threw her arms around him. "Yes, Grant, 1,000 times yes." The vow renewal ceremony was a small, intimate affair, held in the garden where so many of their pivotal moments had taken place. Close friends, family, and a few trusted colleagues gathered to witness the occasion. Veronica wore a simple white dress, her hair cascading in soft waves, while Grant looked dashing in a tailored suit. As he stood at the altar, leaning on his cane but standing tall, he felt a surge of pride and gratitude. When Veronica walked down the aisle, their eyes met, and the world seemed to fade away. In that moment it was just the two of them, bound by a love that had been tested and proven stronger than any obstacle. Their vows were heartfelt and raw, a reflection of their journey together. "I didn't believe in second chances," Grant said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "But you showed me that it's never too late to hope, to heal, and to love. You've given me more than I ever thought possible, and I promise to spend the rest of my life giving you the same." Veronica's voice trembled as she spoke. "You taught me that love isn't a distraction. It's a strength. You've shown me what it means to trust, to fight for something real, and to believe in a future I never thought I'd have. I love you, Grant, and I always will." When they kissed, the small crowd erupted into cheers, but for Grant and Veronica, the moment was theirs alone. A promise of forever. With the scandal behind them and their love stronger than ever, Grant and Veronica turned their attention to a new mission. Inspired by their journey, they decided to launch the Harlow Pierce Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to funding medical research and supporting people with disabilities. The foundation's mission was twofold: to advance regenerative medicine and to provide resources for individuals and families navigating life with disabilities. They wanted to ensure that no one else would have to face the struggles Grant had endured alone. The launch event for the foundation was a resounding success. Held at the Harlow Biotech headquarters, it brought together scientists, philanthropists, and advocates from around the world. Veronica gave a passionate speech about the importance of hope and innovation, while Grant spoke candidly about his own experiences and the need for systemic change. "We're not just funding research," Grant said, his voice strong and clear. "We're funding hope. We're building a future where no one has to feel like their life is over because of a diagnosis or an accident. And we're doing it together." The audience erupted into applause, and as Grant and Veronica stood side by side on the stage, they felt a renewed sense of purpose. Later that night, after the event had ended and the guests had gone home, Grant and Veronica sat together on the balcony of their bedroom, looking out over the estate. The stars were bright, the air crisp and cool. "I still can't believe how much has changed," Veronica said, resting her head on Grant's shoulder. "Neither can I," he admitted. "But I wouldn't change a thing. Every challenge, every mistake, it all led us here." She smiled, her fingers lacing with his. "Do you ever think about what's next?" "All the time," he said, turning to look at her. "But as long as you're by my side, I know we can handle anything." Veronica leaned in and kissed him, her heart full. "I love you, Grant Harlow." "And I love you, Veronica Pierce Harlow," he replied, his voice filled with warmth. "Do you believe in second chances? Have you ever experienced a love that changed your life? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Love Scene Diaries for more unforgettable love stories.